It all began with what I thought were innocent comments, compliments even. My brother's fiancée would casually mention things like, "Wow, your house is so cozy. I love what you've done with it." At first, I took it as polite conversation. Who doesn't like a little acknowledgement for their hard work? But over time, her remarks started to feel calculated. She'd say things like, "This garden is perfect for summer parties. Imagine hosting weddings here." Weddings. That's when I felt the first pang of unease. Why was she talking about weddings in my backyard? I brushed it off, thinking maybe she was just excited about her upcoming big day and letting her imagination run wild. But something about her tone stuck with me. It was almost too deliberate. Then there was the day she jokingly said, "You know, if you ever decide to move, you have to let me know first. I mean, this place is a dream." It was framed as a joke, sure, but there was something in her eyes, a spark of sincerity that made my stomach twist. I forced a laugh and said, "Don't hold your breath," but inside, alarm bells were going off. Was she seriously eyeing my house for herself? As the weeks went by, her behavior became even more unsettling. She began asking oddly specific questions. "How much do you pay for utilities here? Is it hard to maintain a house like this? Did you do the renovations yourself?" At first, I thought maybe she was just curious. After all, she and my brother were looking for a place of their own. But then she'd say things like, "Oh, I'd never change this kitchen. It's perfect." Or, "This guest room is just begging to be turned into a nursery." A nursery? For who? The more I paid attention, the clearer it became. She wasn't just admiring my house. She was imagining herself in it. And that's when the uneasiness turned into dread. Was she planning something? The real turning point came during a family gathering. We were all sitting around the living room, and she casually mentioned how difficult the housing market was. "It's just so hard to find a place with character, you know," she said, her eyes scanning my walls like she was already redecorating them in her mind. Then she looked directly at me and said, "You're so lucky to have this place. It must feel amazing to have such a secure home." I didn't know how to respond. Was that a compliment or a hint? I felt my chest tighten. Why did it feel like she was laying the groundwork for something bigger? But the moment that really sent me over the edge happened just a few days later. I was in the kitchen, and she came in with this odd smile on her face. "Have you ever thought about downsizing?" she asked, almost too casually. "I mean, a big house like this, it must be a lot to handle. I can't imagine dealing with all the upkeep." I blinked at her, trying to process what she was saying. Downsizing? Why on earth would I think about that? I'm perfectly happy here. But before I could even answer, she added, "You know, if you ever feel like simplifying your life, you should let us know. We'd love a place like this." Froze. That wasn't just a passing comment. That was a clear suggestion, a veiled offer to swoop in and take over the very home I'd worked so hard to build. My blood boiled. Who did she think she was? And yet, the most chilling moment came when I overheard her talking to one of her friends during another family gathering. I was in the hallway when I heard her say, "Honestly, it's just sitting there with so much potential. I bet we could convince him to let us have it eventually. I mean, it's not like he needs all that space." My jaw dropped. There it was, plain as day. She wasn't just admiring my house. She was plotting to take it. I felt betrayed, furious, and honestly a little scared. How could someone I barely knew feel entitled to something so personal? I confronted my brother later that day, hoping he'd clear things up, maybe even laugh at how ridiculous the situation sounded. But his reaction left me speechless. He got defensive, accusing me of blowing things out of proportion. "She's just joking," he said, waving me off. "You're being paranoid." Paranoid? Was I? I replayed every conversation, every lingering look, every casual comment in my head, trying to make sense of it all. Maybe I was overthinking things, but my gut told me otherwise. This wasn't just a coincidence. It was a pattern. Now I'm stuck in this impossible situation. I love my brother, but how can I support him when his fiancée clearly has ulterior motives? And what does this mean for our family dynamic? Every time I see her now, I feel like I'm walking on eggshells, trying to navigate this unspoken tension without setting off a bomb. And the worst part, I can't even talk about it openly without risking a major fallout. What do I do? Am I supposed to just sit back and let her manipulate her way into my home, my life? Or do I stand my ground and risk alienating my brother forever? It's a lose-lose situation, and I'm drowning in it. Can you imagine being in a situation like this, where someone you should trust feels like a threat? It's exhausting, infuriating, and just plain heartbreaking. And the craziest part, this is only the beginning. The moment I started piecing everything together, I couldn't help but replay every single interaction I'd had with my brother's fiancée. It was like watching a suspenseful movie, but this time I was the main character, and the stakes were my home, my peace of mind, and my family relationships. Every memory felt like a clue, a puzzle piece that painted a clearer picture of her intentions. I remember one day, not long after they got engaged, she showed up unexpectedly at my place. At first, I thought she just wanted to hang out, maybe bond a little. She walked in, looked around, and said, "Wow, this place always feels so welcoming." It sounded sweet, right? But then she added, almost absent-mindedly, "I can just imagine living somewhere like this. It's perfect for a family." That comment lingered with me. What did she mean by that? Why was she imagining living here? Another time I was hosting a family dinner, and she kept wandering around the house, making little remarks. "This room would be great for a nursery," she mused as we passed the guest room. My jaw nearly hit the floor. A nursery? I hadn't even asked her to tour the house, let alone brainstorm renovations. But I laughed it off, trying to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she was just making conversation, right? But things kept escalating. She'd drop hints in the most awkward ways, almost like she was testing the waters. One day, she mentioned how much she and my brother were struggling to find the right place. I nodded sympathetically, thinking she was venting. But then she said, "You know, your house would solve all our problems." I nearly choked on my coffee. She wasn't even trying to be subtle anymore. I started paying closer attention after that, and what I saw only made me more uneasy. Every time she visited, she acted less like a guest and more like she already owned the place. She'd rearrange things without asking, like moving my decorative pillows or suggesting new spots for my furniture. Once, she even went as far as to say, "You know, a sectional would look amazing here. It would really bring the room together." I couldn't help but think, why are you redecorating a house that isn't yours? And then there was the infamous backyard incident. I had a few friends over for a barbecue, and she and my brother showed up later in the evening. I'll never forget the way she looked around with this gleam in her eye. She pulled my brother aside and whispered something to him, and he laughed. Curious, I asked what was so funny. My brother grinned and said, "She thinks this backyard would be the perfect spot for our wedding someday." My blood boiled. Your wedding? In my backyard? Without even asking me. I tried to keep my cool, but it was like a storm was raging inside me. Was I overreacting? Or was she really trying to plant seeds for something bigger? The conversations got more and more brazen. Once she asked about the mortgage on my house, out of nowhere. She phrased it like an innocent question, saying, "It must feel amazing to have this place paid off, right?" But her tone was laced with something else, something that felt calculated. It wasn't just curiosity. It was probing. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was trying to position herself for something. Every time I brought up these red flags to my brother, he'd shrug it off. "She's just being friendly," he'd say. Or worse, "You're reading too much into it." It was like hitting a brick wall. He didn't see what I saw, or maybe he didn't want to see it. And the most infuriating moment, when she cornered me at a family gathering and said, "You know, we've been thinking. If you ever wanted to move somewhere smaller, we'd love to take care of this house for you." She said it with such a sweet smile, as if she were doing me a favor. I felt my chest tighten. Was this her endgame? Slowly wearing me down until I handed over the keys. The thing is, it wasn't just her words. It was her actions, her demeanor, the way she seemed to be calculating every move. Felt like she was playing chess while I was stuck in checkers. She wasn't just admiring my house, She was planning for it. And yet, through all of this, my brother remained oblivious. Or worse, complicit. Whenever I tried to bring it up, he'd get defensive, accusing me of being paranoid. She loves this house because she loves spending time here with you, he'd argue. But I knew better. This wasn't about me, it was about what she could gain. I started to question everything. Was she truly in love with my brother? Or was he just a means to an end? Every interaction with her felt like walking on eggshells, and every comment she made felt like a dagger cloaked in silk. I didn't know how to navigate it anymore. The worst part. I couldn't escape the nagging thought that maybe I was overthinking everything. Maybe I was just being territorial or overprotective. But deep down I knew. This wasn't just a coincidence. This was a pattern. If you've ever experienced that gut feeling, that sense that something's off, you know how consuming it can be. It's like a storm cloud hanging over you, growing darker with each passing day. And now I'm stuck in the middle of it, trying to figure out how to protect myself, my home, and my relationship with my brother. All while pretending everything's fine. But it's not fine, it's far from fine. And the cracks are only getting wider. The breaking point came on a day that seemed like any other, but it turned out to be anything but. I had invited my brother and his fiancée over for lunch, a casual get-together, or so I thought. Little did I know, it would spiral into one of the most intense and unforgettable moments of my life. We were all sitting in the living room after finishing the meal, chatting about random things. She had been unusually quiet, which immediately set off alarms in my head. This wasn't like her. She was usually at the center of the conversation, making her presence known. But today, it felt like she was biding her time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And then it happened. With an almost eerie calmness, she turned to me and said, "I've been meaning to talk to you about something important." The way she said it, her tone, her body language. It was as if she'd been rehearsing this for weeks. My stomach tightened and I braced myself, even though I had no idea what was coming. She continued, with the wedding coming up and everything, we've been thinking a lot about our future. And where we want to live. Her eyes flicked to my brother, who nodded as if they'd already had this conversation 100 times. I could feel my heartbeat quicken. Where was this going? Then she dropped the bomb. We've been talking, and we both agree that this house would be perfect for us after we get married. She said it so casually, like she was asking to borrow sugar or use the Wi-Fi. My mind went blank for a second, and then the words hit me like a freight train. This house. My house. Perfect for you. I stared at her, trying to process what she had just said. Was this a joke? Was I being pranked? But the look on her face told me otherwise. She was dead serious. Before I could even form a response, she kept going. It just makes so much sense. The location is great, it's already furnished, and it's got plenty of room for a growing family. Plus, you've mentioned before that you've been thinking about downsizing, right? Downsizing? When had I ever said that? My pulse was racing, my hands were clammy, and I could feel the heat rising to my face. She wasn't just hinting anymore. She was flat out stating her claim on my home. I glanced at my brother, hoping, praying that he'd step in, that he'd say something to defuse this insane situation. But all he did was shrug and say, "Yeah, we've been thinking it might be a good idea. It'd save us a lot of stress trying to find a place. And you wouldn't have to worry about maintaining a big house anymore." That was it. The dam broke. I couldn't stay silent any longer. "Are you serious right now?" I exclaimed, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. "You think I'm just going to hand over my house because it's convenient for you?" The room went silent. She looked taken aback, but only for a moment. Then she composed herself and said, "I'm not saying you have to just give it to us. We'd make it worth your while. Maybe you could rent it to us or even sell it. We'd make sure to take good care of it." Her words only fueled the fire inside me. This isn't about taking care of the house. This is my home, my sanctuary. And you're treating it like it's just another property on the market. I turned to my brother, hoping he'd finally understand how outrageous this was. "How can you even entertain this idea? Do you realize what you're asking of me?" He hesitated, his face a mix of guilt and confusion. I just thought maybe it could work out for everyone. I didn't think you'd react like this. React like this. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Of course I'm reacting like this. You two are planning your future around something that isn't even on the table. You didn't ask if I was okay with it. You just assumed. And then the real kicker. She folded her arms and said, "Well, I didn't think it would be such a big deal. It's not like you have a family of your own living here. It's just you, right? Just me." Those two words cut deeper than I expected. It was as if she was trying to invalidate my connection to my own home, like it didn't matter because I didn't have a spouse or kids. The audacity of it all left me speechless for a moment. Finally I found my voice. This isn't about who lives here or how many people are under this roof. It's about respect, and you've completely crossed the line. The tension in the room was suffocating. My brother tried to mediate, saying, "Let's all just take a step back and talk about this calmly." But it was too late for calm. The damage was done. I looked at both of them and said, "This conversation is over. My house is not up for discussion. And if you can't respect that, then we have a bigger problem than I thought." It was a defining moment, not just for my relationship with my brother's fiancée, but for my own boundaries. I realized then and there that I wasn't going to let anyone, no matter how close, manipulate or guilt me into giving up something so important to me. As they left, the weight of what had just happened settled over me. I knew this wasn't the end of the story. Far from it. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let anyone take my home, my peace, or my dignity without a fight. In the end, this entire ordeal has been an emotional roller coaster. It's tested my patience, my relationships, and even my sense of self-worth. I've learned the hard way that standing up for yourself, even against family, isn't easy, but it's necessary. My house isn't just four walls. It's my sanctuary, my history, my home. While I'm still navigating the aftermath, one thing is clear. I'm not letting anyone bulldoze over my boundaries again. Family should be about love and respect, not entitlement. Have you ever faced a situation like this? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories.